So my name's Chad Baker. I'm the founder of LAE Software. And a lot of people always wonder, what does the LAE stand for? So what it comes from is the Microsoft exams, specifically from the early 2000s when I was working on a Windows 2000 MCSE. The questions would always ask how to solve a problem, and they would always begin with least administrative effort. So the LAE, least administrative effort. What is the best way to solve this problem? So that's what the company name is, and that's kind of our motto. Is we try to write software that makes things easier for people. And what I'm talking about today is talking about removing some of the roadblocks that you may be running into, either that you're running into now or that you may run into later when you're working on your digital transformation projects, and kind of some little way to solve some of those roadblocks. So when I think of IT automation, I think of doing things to automate more specifically for internal IT type uses. So some of those might be scripting out repetitive tasks. That might also be augmenting products that are missing something, like maybe an integration with some of your systems. Also abstracting and correlating information from multiple systems. So pulling information from multiple things and bringing them into a central location, and then being able to link the data together and report on that. And it's usually owned and operated by the in-house kind of IT teams, which most of the time is like the IT infrastructure teams. So I wanted to clarify that with RPA, which a lot of people have probably heard in the industry, which is robotic process automation. And RPA, when I think of RPA, it's a little bit more the commercialized version of automation. That is still scripting a lot of repetitive tasks, but most of the time those are business type processes. So that might be taking using an RPA bot and building an automation that goes into a website, logs in, makes some changes, pulls down some information, and continues on. That's more what I think of when I think of RPA. One of the things specific to RPA is that it also involves licensing of a bot. So the way that the RPA companies make money is by licensing the bot for how much you get to use it. And that's what does your automation. And with that, it also comes with a lot of examples and kind of some starter scripts. So as a good jump start into doing automation, RPA is a good choice there. And then lots of times with RPA, it is because people are trying to move a little bit faster, they will bring in outside consultants, usually tied to the whichever RPA solution they go with. So whenever you need something new, or if there's a problem with something that was built by the RPA consultants, you usually have to contact them to make any changes or updates. So that is kind of what I wanted to cover about automation before I continue on. So when I'm talking about roadblocks within people's IT systems that they need to either get rid of now or when they are actually doing digital transformation, what I'm talking about is really technical debt. So for those not familiar with the industry term of technical debt, what that is all the things that people knew they needed to take care of, but they just didn't do it. And so I was actually one of the people that was involved in around the time when a lot of technical debt was being formed. And so I wanted to kind of tell you a little bit why the technical debt was formed and why now it's a good time to get rid of it and why they're roadblocks. So the big reason that, the big reason that technical debt was formed is, so when we would have a project where we needed to get something done, what I would do or somebody on my team would do is we would go through and we would go out and collect information about what we wanted to do. So that's kind of your scope. Then we would go out and find the costs associated. So what infrastructure we were going to need, whether that be cloud resources or internal resources, licensing costs. And then we would figure out kind of a project schedule about how long it would take us. So this is, for those that are familiar, this is the project manager's triangle, also referred to as the triple constraint. So the idea there is that if you affect one, you're affecting the other ones. And so that's kind of the equation below. So the kind of the amount of things you can do is the scope, and then what you're able to get done is kind of a function of the cost and the time. So the reason technical debt really formed was that the scope was hardly ever changed. You had to get the things done, and you really couldn't do half of the problem. You usually had to do the full problem. So that one, what you couldn't really adjust. And the reason that these things kind of get pushed off to the next year or pushed into the closet was because you never had enough budget to do them, or you didn't have enough time. So as I was talking about, we would gather all that information about what we wanted to do. We would take that information up to our CIO to get approval to do the project. We'd go in, share all the information, and they would say, yeah, we don't have enough money for this. Let's put it on the list for next year. And that list just keeps growing and growing and growing. And from what I found with my experience was that the only way to get these things done is I and my team started writing our own automations, which saved us time and saved us cost, and we were able to get these things done. So that's why I'm proposing this as IT automation as a way to get all this technical debt out of the way so you can actually get to digital transformation. So here are some of the examples of roadblocks that I've seen either at other companies or companies that I've worked at. So one of them is the Active Directory domains. So a lot of enterprises have Active Directory as their primary authentication and identity platform, and that may integrate with other platforms. So one example is a healthcare company that I worked with. They had over 70 different Active Directory forests. So what that meant is that as this company grew through a lot of acquisitions, when they would buy another company, they would pull them into their network, but they never took the time, because they didn't have the time or the money, to take all those accounts and put those accounts together into one domain. So as they continue to grow, they buy a company, they'd add another domain, they buy another company, they'd add another domain. So that increases the complexity of all their systems. So when you're thinking of a digital transformation project that requires identity, so like say an ERP solution or a human capital management solution, the people are going to be able to need to log into that application. So when it comes time to say who gets access to the app, if you have 70 different domains out there, it's going to take a long time to get every domain configured to allow authentication to that application. And there could also be a lot of conflicts within the names. So there might be a Chad Baker who worked at one company and a Chad Baker who worked at another, and our login IDs might be the same, which isn't a problem with multiple domains because it's unique by the domain. But when you're trying to combine to a single source that's trying to authenticate, that's where you can run into some major problems. So automation can help with that. So a good example is we wrote some automation that took, so when I worked for a different healthcare company, we merged with another larger organization, and we needed to integrate our two Active Directory domains. So when we first needed to exit the company we were being bought from, we had to pull the domain out, and then we used some automation scripts to go through and find any of the accounts that were causing issues with still being able to run once we ripped them out of the domain. So that's one example of how we used automation. The other is initially the priority was to get the domains to where people's email would integrate. So the first thing we did is wrote some, and this was a while ago, so we actually wrote this in VB script, but we created some scripts that would take the accounts from both domains and pass the information just on email address and contact information. So they would show up in the email address list. So that way the people could start to communicate. And then after that, then we use some other automation to actually move over the accounts. deal with all the name collisions, and then we all got them into one consolidated domain. So another example of the where you can run into some problems as a roadblock, and that I've seen too, is with asset management. So the a lot of the asset management tools that are out there are usually specific to one area. So speaking of the Microsoft kind of world, there is a product from Microsoft called Microsoft System Center. So what System Center does is it pulls in information from Windows devices, like desktops, laptops, servers, that type of thing. And then you have asset management systems that are tied specifically to user support groups that may be using it for tracking of hardware. So they might pull in there like the scan the serial numbers of devices, serial numbers of the mouse, the keyboard, that type of thing. So they might have a database of all the assets that they've deployed. And one of the big problems is that all these multiple systems that people have for managing what assets the company has, they don't talk to each other. So one of the things you can do with automation is take all these disparate systems of information and then pull them out using the available APIs they have. Or for some of those that do not have APIs to pull information out, you can actually sometimes get into the database and do direct database queries to pull that information out. And what we did is we created a kind of a centralized, abstracted linking of all that information that can help you create better decisions for the business. One example of that is for capacity planning. So we would take the information from VMware's virtual systems, the information from Microsoft's System Center, and the information from our storage arrays, and we would put all that information together to create a forecasting of how much storage we were going to need in order to support all of the just the natural growth, and then also add to that any new projects for that growth as well. And I know I'm probably going to blow up my slides here because I'm looking at my notes, but the other ones is like that Brad was mentioning, some of the kind of the skeletons in the closets that you might find are the like you could use that information that you find through those asset management scans. You could find like some ODBC connections that you weren't aware of. You can also find hard-coded IP addresses. And then one of the other good things is that you can find out who is using which applications. One of the other roadblocks that this is one that we've been getting more involved with lately is the scattered data problem. So if you think about where people store data, it could be stored within an application, within a database tied specifically to that application. Or for users, they store a lot of their data either in a group share or a user share or on their computer or within email. So as companies are doing their transformations, one of the nice things about specifically like doing a cloud migration is that you can get all of your data into one location so you can access it from multiple devices. And you can also share it out easier to other people to be able to either edit at the same time. And to get to that point, one of the ways people do that is they'll use products for cloud sharing, like Box or Microsoft's OneDrive. And sometimes there's some roadblocks with getting that data up to OneDrive or to Box, and the problems are usually related to the type of data that is on the systems. So specifically, one that's a good example is like Microsoft Outlook PSTs. So an Outlook PST is something that is added to Outlook to allow you to take data from your mailbox, move it out into a file. And the main reason these existed was due to mailbox limits. So it used to be you'd have a small mailbox limit, and then you wouldn't be able to send until you got below your limit. So what people would do is they'd create a Outlook PST, store it on their computer, move data out of their mailbox, and then they would be able to send email again. Well, now when people are migrating their all the data that's stored on their computer up to OneDrive. When OneDrive goes to sync that data up, it's unable to sync those PSTs because they're usually in use with Outlook, or they're extremely large. There's some limits on what is allowed to be migrated. So kind of an example of an automation, which is actually one of our products, is we've got a product that goes out and automatically discovers where you have Outlook PSTs. It migrates that data up to Office 365. So now that data is available from a compliance perspective, and it's also available from multiple devices. So it migrates all that data, removes the PST, and then it allows the OneDrive to continue. And then one of the other good ways you can use automation to kind of get rid of some roadblocks is what I've noticed with a lot of the security regulations that are coming down is that people are creating security policies to match what the regulations are recommending. And what people are doing is they will come up with a policy that says we're going to match this to a regulation, say like GDPR. They go through and they create their policies, but it's hard to make sure what they say they're doing is what they are actually doing. So automation can help there, because you can write some automation that can go out and apply that policy to the systems. So one of those is like a good example of that is, and this also is kind of a technical debt problem as well, is as people are creating shared folders, lots of times what they'll do is they will give somebody access to that folder when that person was in a certain role. That person may change roles, but they still have access to the folder. So you could write some automation that goes through and checks folder permissions to make sure it is only the people that should have access. You can also use automation to create queries on groups to make sure that only the people that are in that role now are in that group that has the access to those files. Another way you could use automation is a good example is with servers. The accounts that are stored locally on the servers or who has been given access to a server, you can automate based upon your policy who has access to it. You can also automate the password changing for either the local administrator accounts or for the service accounts. Okay, so that's kind of covers the examples of some of the roadblocks that are out there and the ways automation can kind of help get those out of the way. So if you're looking to build out an automation program, here's kind of the steps I recommend to start building it out. So the first thing to look for would be the right mindset. So within your own team currently is to find the people who despise and hate doing the exact same thing over and over. There's some people who really like that, and then there's some that do not. So I would look for the ones who want to automate their day-to-day job. So find those people. And then also include automation as part of your hiring practices. So as you're putting out resumes and looking for people, start putting things on the resume that relate to what you're looking from an automation perspective. So look for people who have automated problems or people who have a specific automation skill set tied to the standards that you want to use within your organization, which brings me to the next one, is to set some standards for how you want people to do automation, like centralized location for where you're going to be creating your bots. So that bot may be a service, that bot may be a scheduled task, or it may be an RPA service bot. Also with those standards, kind of standardize on the scripting languages you want to use. So for people who are primarily Microsoft, I'd recommend looking at PowerShell. Most things for within Microsoft can be done with PowerShell and integrations with the .NET API. Also, C# works well for people who are kind of looking to go to the next level from PowerShell. For people who have primarily Linux systems in their organization or are using Linux systems within cloud services, I'd recommend looking at either Bash or Python. Looks like Python is the most preferred scripting language for Linux. And then if you have Mac systems, it looks like I haven't used AppleScript before, but JavaScript is also very portable to other systems. And since I mentioned RPA, some of the RPA vendors that are out there are some ones to look at are UiPath. Automation Anywhere is another one. Blue Prism. And then again, if you're a big Microsoft customer, the Microsoft Power Automate is a good one to look at there. Let me go to the next slide here. So once you have the standards and you've identified the people that you want to be kind of involved in your automation program, the next thing that I'd recommend doing is training to those standards. So like New Horizons has some great classes to where you can get people going. That's how I got my start. Is I noticed that I wanted to start automating some things and had asked our IT management if I could do a Visual Basic scripting class, which got me down the path I'm on now, which led to a software company. But so for instance, if you're a Microsoft shop, I'd recommend getting your people out for PowerShell classes and then kind of grow from there. For the RPA, I mentioned some of those tool sets. So I would talk to either consultants you work with about which RPA they would recommend, and also possibly some implementation services. Should I already cover that one? And then kind of the next task from there is I would start freeing up as much time as you can within your own organization by automating anything you can find. So if you have, if you're responsible for your support group and you have some automators within that group, have them look into whatever they can automate from a provisioning perspective that can give them more time to possibly go out and write some scripts to improve the asset management, like find out who has what monitors, that type of thing. And then once you've got kind of that skill set in place, you've freed up some time, I think then that is the time to kind of look at what roadblocks are going to be in the way for digital transformation. So I would start backwards from what your digital transformation strategy is, and then start looking at all the things related. So like if your first step is an ERP solution, think about all the things that related to the ERP and what connections it has. Like identity is a good example there. So start looking at how clean your Active Directory environment is, how you can clean that up. If there's any domain consolidation you need to do, get those things done as soon as possible. And then, so once you've built an automation program, some of the things that I found building automation programs at a couple of different companies is that you start to get improved communication with your development teams as well. So as your infrastructure teams or support teams get a little more used to how things are developed and a little bit more about APIs, they're able to talk more with development teams about certain issues. So a good example of that is I was working with a developer who they were trying to get files from we had a web server that was in the DMZ, so from a isolated network and isolated authentication domain, and they were trying to get files from there to the internal side, and they were running into issues with how they can authenticate between the two. And because we had done some automation and understood some APIs, we were able to actually come up with a code library for them to be able to pass credentials and be able to move those files, which really helped us with kind of that capital with the development groups, because then when we came to them and asked them to add some error handling to a process that had been giving our operations team some trouble, they were happy to do it because we had also were able to help them with a development need. So kind of in line with that, one of the other bonus benefits is you can reduce load on developers. So to kind of get an idea of which team within an IT department is the most overloaded, one of the things that I always think about is the IT change control board. which the change control board is what I've seen where people from multiple departments get together and they talk about what is the priorities for the development team. And the reason that they have to do that is because there is so much need and so many requests coming in that they aren't able to get to everything. So they have to prioritize in order to get to the things that are the best for the business. So if you build out an automation team with people who are traditionally not developers, they can knock off some of those smaller needs. A good example of that is we had this is quite a bit ago, but there was a AS400 system that had some data that they wanted to pull data off of that, pull it out to a file share, read the information, and put it in just simply into an Excel spreadsheet for the finance team. So that was something that we took on from the automation team perspective, built some quick automation, and then bought back some time for the developers there. Also, as you build out kind of automation skills within your team, you also find that you get some enhanced problem solving. So as people think a little bit more like developers, they start to understand a little bit more how other applications work, and they're able to bring that to the troubleshooting side as well. So they can quickly diagnose where there might be a problem with an application, or use some of their skills to be able to pull more information together to help them to find out exactly where the problem is. And then one of the other great things about automated systems is that you get extreme improved accuracy. So the support teams that automate their provisioning, they're able to not only save themselves time, but it reduces the amount of errors that they have. So like if they're manually typing into multiple systems, that information can be right in one system and wrong in the other, which becomes then a huge pain to fix at a later date. So if you automate that whole process, you enter the information once, it is then accurate throughout all the other systems. And another example of that, going back to the Active Directory groups, one thing we found with automating Active Directory groups is that the memberships were off by a large percentage. Like I think it was like 300% for one group, I remember, because it had grown through people requesting access to a group, either a distribution group for just email notifications or a group that is used for application access. So I'll pause there again for questions. Sorry, I know I went pretty quick, but I think at the last one of the day, a quick one's good. Here is, if you're looking to connect with me, and I'll throw this in the chat as well, but my email address is chad@LAE Software. The web address is LAE Software. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn as Chad D. Baker or LAE-Software.